don't we get started? Hello everybody, my name is Arun Nagarajan and I'm here to talk about battery efficient location services. How many of you folks saw Chuck's talk right before this? Anyone was in the location talk? It actually, I think coincidentally is going to work out really well. I think content-wise, I was really nervous that we're going to end up talking about the same stuff, but I think you did a great job of walking through the intros and the content that's out there, and hopefully I can hone in on some of the specifics that we as developers have to worry about. That's my contact information on Google Plus and on Twitter. Please reach out if you have any questions. And also during the talk, we'll keep it pretty informal. It's Sunday afternoon, so feel free to raise your hand and ask questions. Let's dig into it right then and there instead of waiting until the end. Great. So a quick background, I'm currently at a startup. We haven't launched yet, so I can't unfortunately do demos or anything like that. I just started there a couple months ago. We are hiring, so if you're in the location space, we'd love to talk to you. Right before that, I was at Google, and I was in the team that helped launch the Android Wear platform. I'm not wearing mine because it would tell me football scores right now, and I don't want that. Yeah, so that's sort of my background. So let's dive into location services. I think that's sort of a nebulous term, and I think it's intentionally a nebulous term. It's not a technical term like accelerometer or GPS or anything like that, right? Location services is a term that product managers came up with to make sense to individual users, not for engineers. So it's one of the first things that I think as engineers need to understand is obviously that location services and maps are very different. Maps have a visual element to them. Maps can work without GPS signal, so I can still unfold a paper map and see where I am and do interesting things. That doesn't have to involve technology. But location and location services becomes extremely technical very quickly with a lot of really sort of side questions about privacy, battery efficiency, which I'll talk about quite a bit, and then all the different approaches to location. Am I using Wi-Fi? Am I using GPS? And really, there's just a lot of different options, and Google's done a great job of making the Google Play services bring it up to speed with some of the things like Fuse Location Provider that helps solve some of this. And ultimately, it's all about context, right? So a lot of times you need both maps and location, but you can get away with just location a lot of times. There's no reason to see some of the information in a map, but just want to give suggestions and content that's relevant to them based on where they are. I mentioned this in sort of different terms, but it's all about capabilities over technologies, right? So the user doesn't care about, am I giving this person my accelerometer data? They care about, am I telling this app, am I biking or walking or running, right? So those are some of the terms that you have to think about in terms of technology. And that, as you bake in terms in your application, it's very easy to creep into using these technical terms and confusing the users. So that's one thing that I like to talk about. It's not related to battery, but it is something that we want to let people understand what it is that you're trying to ask information about them. Because I think once that's clear, there's a lot of things about it around transparency, particularly around the compromises, right? I think one of the things that a lot of users don't like is when it's a great app, but it's going to kill your battery by 50%. Like, that's not something that people would choose, especially for apps that want to be on the user's device at like 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., which is end of the day. It doesn't make sense if your app is going to be killing a lot of battery. It's not a lot to begin with there. And one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is background location. So the app that I'm working on, the goal is to have the app running constantly and ambiently send up accurate location fixes in the 10-minute range. It's been a huge challenge, and hopefully I can share some of the things that I've been working on that space. And what that allows you to do is just some of the services that you can build once you have that level of information with consent from the user for the right reasons. You can do some really interesting things. Rather than just having to have the user go into the foreground or type in a search query or tell you who their friends are, you can sort of infer a lot of things and provide a lot of interesting new applications to the user. So there's some of the things here that will be a rehash from some of the content from about a year ago at Google I/O that I worked with. But I think it is really important because we spent a lot of time kind of distilling it down to these three things, right? So there's power when it comes to location services. How much drain on resources is it going to be? What is the power draw on the battery in very technical terms? How many milliwatt hours is that? Accuracy, so within how many centimeters, hopefully, but how many meters, normally that's the case, is your location fixed. I mostly am happy with anything within 10 meters, but there are people that I work with that are extremely sensitive to that sub-meter accuracy. I haven't seen that yet in any reliable way, and the problem becomes kind of academic to me, so I've kind of given up on it. But it is something that a lot of people are working towards, which is something that is within a foot away from where you are. That's incredible accuracy. And then coverage, ultimately, right? Like there are different heuristics about GPS in New York City versus Kansas, where it's just flat and you can there's no bouncing off the walls. There's no there's just a lot more cell towers too. So there's certain things that are more accurate and there's certain things that are less accurate. It's kind of funny that GPS is more accurate in flat areas, but there are fewer cell towers. So the net result is longer time to get a fix, but it's more accurate. So you have to figure out like what is better and depending on the use cases. We happen to be focused on urban areas, so we're kind of much more interested in the quicker fixes that is within 10 meters. That's sort of our focus, that's our sweet spot. I think you have to figure out that what it is that you're trying to solve. If you're a driving application or a very detailed location-based geocaching application, let's say, you need that sort of always-on immediate accuracy. Even if it takes 30 seconds, the accuracy is more important than I would say, the time to fix, right? That's what coverage is all about, which is what is your profile of the space you're trying to map out. And each one of these has some really interesting heuristics, right? So there's really, I'd love to see a smiley face across the board or across a column. Really isn't, probably not going to be a smiley face for a while. So the two axes here is the type of technology and the parameters we defined in the slide earlier, right? Power, accuracy, and coverage. GPS, just to kind of talk about a couple of bullets. GPS, extremely power hungry. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Cell towers, really good about power and battery drain. That's because for the last 25 years, cell phones know how to maintain a connection with the cell tower, and they've extremely optimized it from flip phones on, right? However, their accuracy is about 300 meters for the most part. In New York City, you can get up to 40 meters, which is great. But for the most part, you should kind of think about it in 300 meters. Coverage is great. I think there's very few spots where you cannot make a phone call these days. But again, these are some of the considerations to think about as you're kind of defining your things. For the most part, as casual developers, you can get away with not worrying about any of it. That's thanks to things like the fused location provider. But as you get into things like battery efficiency and background location updates, this is something that you have to really worry about and know what kind of fixes you're getting. And you can actually start doing some interesting analytics with the information because you can start deciding whether you want to skip a few coverage locations that you know is going to be switched to the GPS ahead of time. So what happens is that if you know your user is going to be in a suburban area with really good GPS coverage but really poor Wi-Fi and cellular coverage, you can actually initially start with the GPS fix. That saves you some time. We're not doing that kind of stuff yet, but that is something that we can start to optimize a little bit more. And maybe the system itself will do that very soon for us. Some specifics on the actual battery drain. The big one, I should really put it in red, is the high accuracy. So if you're asking for GPS fixes in like every minute or so, for about an hour, you're killing about 7.5–8% of that user's battery. And that's crazy. That's like with good signal. Imagine if they're going in and out of a subway station, or if it's cloudy, it gets a lot worse, right? So this information, again, is from an I/O talk that I worked on about over a year ago, worked with, I should say. This is out there for a while, but it's crazy. And then this number might be a little different with some of the newer versions of Android, some of the newer devices, but it's still a pretty crazy figure that you have to kind of keep track of. And you can get really good accuracy, really good fixes, depending on how quickly you're connecting to these satellites. You need to have connections with up to 4 satellites to get a good fix. But in an open field, that's really quick to do, especially if you've previously gotten a fix and you kind of know where in the sky the satellite's going to be. So, quick pop quiz. There's many things about a phone that draws power. What do you think here takes the most power out of these things? Wow, you guys are good. Anyone else? Any other guesses? All right, cool. Very good. Display is actually really crazy. It's like the Google Maps team at Google always used to have a discussion around like it always kills my battery, like can we get better about GPS? And the trick was they just started dimming the screen between between something that's an important turn, right? And that helped battery by quite a bit without having to have the screen lit up the whole time. So while GPS is really important to keep in mind, and it's still crazy high, it is not the end-all be-all. The reason people often get kind of confused by it is because unlike CPU and display, GPS tends to be on in the background when the users don't know they're doing something with it. They think, I open my phone, I played a game, I put it away, and it's still draining battery. That's weird for them, right? Even though they just used a ton of display and CPU resources. So that's something to think about is that in the grand scheme of things, this GPS is not the biggest culprit, but it is something that's pretty big and it continues to stay on. This question in the back?
Yeah, where does communicating over the cellular network fit into it?
It barely registers. Yeah.
So sending data up is cheap.
I'm sorry?
So sending data up is cheap.
I don't know the difference there, unfortunately. Sorry, that's a good question. So the question was, where does the cellular network, the LTE networks, and of course LTE is more expensive than 3G and so on. I don't know the details there, but it's somewhere below Wi-Fi. Another question?
Question on the previous slide. There it is. Typical interval is what? What's that referring to?
How often does that change? How often would that
How often does it
fix
actually get a new sensor?
when you get an update in your app? If you just register for constant updates. Cool. Good question. Cool. So one of the things about battery that I started to, as we started digging into it. So we put out a beta, and I'm going to start up. So we're trying to validate our idea. Got small pockets of a few dozen users using our app. And it's sort of really funny how technically savvy our users are, right? You think that they're just trying to get value out of your app, but because of the last 4 or 5 years of really crappy apps, or because people have been training them and teaching them what to look for about bad apps, people start asking these really interesting questions, even though you know they're a lawyer or a teacher and they know nothing about technology, but they're really good about catching this. So it became pretty apparent that we have to include some of our rationale around using some of these things very clearly through both design, language, and just feature set as to why we're doing it. So don't ask for location fixes. Right as you install the app, wait for it till there's some clear value and things like that. So we'll talk about some of that really quickly. But in general, user first is a good philosophy, but it was kind of interesting to notice that this became pretty important even with things like technical things like battery. A lot of times there's interesting things around asking for location fixes before a map was visible. So I think users were perceptive of this, and they would ask, why is my GPS going on? And I'll talk about how they know that. Interesting things around, like, so one of the simplest things we did was, hey, we want to show you and your friends on a map, and we want to show them the map, and then start asking for GPS, right? So it becomes very clear what this app is doing, and then they're a bit more forgiving about the app's battery needs or capabilities, right? Permissions, so be very careful about what you ask for. We went in with fine, and that made sense for us, but people are definitely paying attention. Of course, the more recent sort of story was around a flashlight app that needed fine location and access to your contacts and access to your everything, right? So people are starting to pay attention. Android does a good job of showing these permissions ahead of time. But if that model changes and it's at usage time, these apps will be in a lot of trouble, right? So we can't, and you only need to know what city you're in, just go with the course. People will respect you for it, and you're doing the right thing for the community. Showing in the UI, right? So one of the things that I really like is that, I forget when this started, but I remember, or maybe some of the mapping applications don't do it, where I ask for walking directions, I forget to stop the app, and I put the app in my pocket, and it's just continuously keeping the GPS hot. So a little sticky notification in the status bar goes a long way. It actually doubles as a benefit where I can actually click on it and then go back into the app. So it tells me two things, right? It tells me that the the GPS is being used, but also gives me a nice feature in that it takes me back into the app. So that's a little nice thing that's pretty unique to Android. Helps you bring you back into your app, but also give you your users notification that this app is doing something interesting. Just bear that in mind, and without having to worry about, oh, I forgot where I left that app in. So let's talk about some of the tools the user has, right? So this little icon varies in many OSs. KitKat, this is on my Moto X. That you see that every device has this one of these that often goes in the wrong direction usually. So these are some of the immediate visual tools the user has. They just glance on the top right and they see it. It's visible in the lock screen. It's something that the users know to look for, right? So that's something that you have to keep in mind. So when you're testing and developing your app, make sure you look at that. I think it's we spend a lot of time thinking about our designs, thinking about how smooth everything feels, but there are other cues that the users are looking at, and make sure you think about that. Battery UI, the GPS indicator, and on the S4, this little GPS indicator blinks, so it's really alarming. So I think not on all S4s, I forget if there was some update where that changed. So that was kind of interesting as well, as we saw users getting freaked out a little bit, even though they had given us access and doing the things that they expect. People are looking for these things. There's also more, right? So I had to blur out our dev versions of the app, so sorry about that. But there's the battery, the UI, which tells you all the things the user can see. You would consider this to be a fairly technical thing, but I think Google's done a really good job, Android's done a really good job of putting very relevant numbers, right? There's no milliwatt hours, there's no CPU nice time, and all the things that we developers like to see on the top view, right? This is just percentages and just apps stack ranked. So I think some of these things put a lot of pressure on us developers, provide a lot of transparency to the users, but it's our job to make sure we know where our app stands in that list. They can tap on your app and they can get really interesting information. So like things like this app needed 11 hours of GPS. And of course, that's before we re-architect our app a little bit. Just took the worst example. But these are things that the users know how to do and know where to look for, because when the battery hits the 15%, 20% mark, guess what? Sometimes there's a dialogue that comes up and users can, one click away, even though they may not know how to get here, they are brought here by the OSs sometimes, because Samsung doesn't want to be known as a device with a bad battery issue. They want to bring the apps that are potentially the culprit to the forefront, right? So these are things that you should keep in mind. You may think of these as user tools, but they become developer tools very quickly. And then also you can, under location services itself, you can see apps that have what kind of battery life that they use. Again, some of these screens vary OSs to OS, but this is the general trend. In fact, if anyone's been playing with iOS 8, same thing. Apps are now ranked by battery usage, and this is a thing that we have to all think about. It's not just about the user ratings, it's about what they see before they rate your app, right? So these are some things to keep in mind. Alright, so let's talk about, so these are some of the things that so far the things I talked about are kind of like, not really technical, but some of the things you should look at. Let's talk about some of the technical things. So the two things that I really like to do when I'm confused about GPS stuff is the location training guide and then the API guide. So these are the two things that I highly recommend you spend a lot of time on. They're actually really well thought through, more verbose than needed in some cases, but they're maintained. I know the team that does a really good job with this. And a little pro tip as well, you can just type in d.android.com, easiest way to get to documentation. In fact, if you go to d.android.com and hit /, it puts the focus right in the API search view, which is really nice. Cool. So let's talk about some of the simplest things that you can do to get location. So I gave the example for a weather app. A weather app needs a one-time fix, right? Usually when the app starts up. So the easiest thing you can do is this one-line API, right? It took a long time. It took about 3 or 4 years of Android API evolution to get to this one line. But it got there, and it's, for most 9 out of 10 apps, maybe even maybe less, maybe 8 out of 10 apps, This is sufficient. They don't need to know constantly updating location. They don't, if you're just trying to show them concerts close by, well, you can have a 100-mile radius. You don't need to have block radius, right, for your app, right? So this is really nice. So it saves you a lot of headache. You don't have to worry about what technology that's using behind the scenes. Things get a little more interesting when you want to get continuous updates. This is where the API gets really sophisticated, and it's come down quite a bit in about 3 or 4 knobs and levers you have to tweak, but it's a lot less scary than it used to be. Notice here you're still not using terms like cell towers, GPS, Wi-Fi. This is again some of the nice things that Google has done, where the API now is at the capability level, not the individual technology level. So let's talk through some of the key things here. The accuracy, which is just what high accuracy. We don't tell it what technology to use, it's high accuracy. If next year Bluetooth beacons are in every mall and Google Play services can connect to those and give us high accuracy, that's great. We don't need to worry about whether it's using satellites or little $10 chips that are stuck on every door. So that's something that's nice. So there's three things that I like to always make sure I'm thinking about. One is update interval. So this is the number of seconds, I think it's milliseconds actually, in how often do you want the fixes from the system. So for most apps, you want that in the minutes, not in seconds. Just make sure you multiply it by 60, and that should be good enough. In theory, it should only ding you for battery life, the interval, for every interval. But my experience has been different. It's as long as your app is running. So be careful when you're playing with this. I'll show you some of the tricks that I've used to get around this. So I need to figure out what's going on, but that's probably one silver bullet that hopefully will save you some time on this. The next one is the fastest interval. So this is, while the first one is supposed to be how much your app is responsible for location fixes, the next one is how much are you just getting location fixes for free. What do I mean by that? So you can actually get notified of fresh locations if some other app is getting fixes. So if they're using navigation and you happen to be a Find My Friends type app, you can get free fixes as long as they're using navigation. And your app doesn't get docked or debited for that battery use. However, they don't want to just constantly keep slamming you with locations, right? Because your server may get overwhelmed, your app may take 5 seconds to respond to every fix. So you want to make sure this is set to something reasonable. I think for the most part, you don't want to get a new fix more than once a minute, even if it's free. Because you have to do something with it, why not just say, no thanks, no, don't wake me up all the time. So that's what that is. My rule for my app is take this is X and this is X by 2. So never more than half as fast as I normally would ask. That's enough for my needs, but think about it as well. And then set smallest displacement. So this is actually one of my favorite things. This is don't notify me. Only notify me if the user moves X meters, or Y meters I should say, because I've already used X. Y meters. So it's one or the other. So tell me if it's been 10 minutes or if the user's moved 100 meters, which is super cool, right? So that way you're not missing out on any interesting things the user is doing. So definitely look at the documentation, make sure that I'm not mistaken about any of this. It's pretty convoluted sometimes, but you should look at the way things were. There's a blog post from 2011 by Reno Meyer that walks you through all the crazy things you had to do back then. It's a lot nicer, so let's all be thankful for this as well. And then once you set up your request, so far you're only configuring your request. This is how you register your request. To say, I want to get location updates, and I'm the callback for now, right? So that's the location request. I didn't talk about how the location client itself is created. That's just asking the Play services for a client and handling Play services not being there and all the ugly stuff that you have to do, but that's boilerplate. So this is the location listener. So far a location client, which can make a location request, which notifies a location listener. I think I got the names right. Yeah, okay, cool. So you just implement the callback, and then you get a on location changed with a location object. So it's kind of cool. So just get the object, and then you're off to the races. The object actually has some interesting things like timestamp, accuracy, I think both vertical and horizontal accuracy. So you can actually throw away some fixes if it's really crap. So you can do some interesting things. And then this, for the most part, I'm just going to trust the system and take the latitude, longitude, and do something interesting with it. So they recommend doing this location listener for foreground apps and then using the pending intent approach for background apps. I haven't seen any difference in battery behavior. So I have only done a few hours of tests. So this is something that requires some further evaluation. But this is basically saying, even if the app has been dismissed, wake me up when my criteria is hit, right? So instead of saying location request updates on the callback, you say location request updates with my pending intent, right? So that's a nice trick to have your app get woken up, even if the user dismissed your app. And you don't have to run a service, you just have to have a service available for it to get started. So that calls an intent service. That's pretty cool. Again, like I said, I haven't noticed any difference in battery performance. I'm sure there's something that I'm not seeing yet, but this requires further testing, and that's sort of my experience. What has been a silver bullet for me is Alarm Manager, like this old school thing. So there's one thing that you're here to learn about from background location updates. It's this stuff is the real deal to get battery efficient location fixes. So in our app, we get every 10 minutes or whatever, I forget the number is, we get woken up and told what the fix is. We just do a very simple one-time fix when we get woken up, and then we disconnect. We say, I don't need to know about GPS at all, go away, don't ding me for any battery on GPS. And then we get woken up again in X minutes, and I do this stuff. So in theory, this should be the same as this, but it's not. If you do this, your app is getting dinged for battery the whole time it's running, which is kind of annoying. So it might be my Moto X, it might be just the version of Android I'm testing with, but like I said, this is one of the things that these are all recent learnings, so certainly would love to hear more if people have had different experiences. Cool. So that's sort of the more complicated, specific nitty-gritty details. Other tricks that we're looking into are, well, if the user's not moving, just ignore it, right? If the user's still, don't bother getting fixes. So this is nice. There's, as of Google Play Services 4 or something, I forget, there is now activity detection APIs. This is from about a year and a half ago. So that's great. So you can say, just let me know when the user does something that is an activity, and especially when things change. So I can just say, wake me up whenever the user is on foot, on bicycle, in vehicle, and I can decide to do something interesting. But for the most part, for what I'm going to do in my app, is just, if it's not still, continue looking for updates. If it's still, pause updates. So don't schedule that alarm manager. So that's a little trick. Like I said, we haven't fully put this in yet, but this looks very promising. It'll be a really good, I think, gain if this works out. So especially when the user is sleeping and the phone's on next to the bed, and we don't need location fixes for that 6 to 10 hours or whatever it is. This is something that we're kind of figuring out how to handle. So you can actually get woken up when the user's battery is low, and you can be a responsible citizen and decide to not make the matters worse. So we need to figure out if we're going to do this and how we're going to do this. It's an interesting question. But that's cool. You can actually get woken up, your receiver gets open, a broadcast receiver gets called, and you can decide to say, is the battery low? It's a simple Boolean, and do your logic. Out of curiosity, anyone use this today? Is it good? 15% you get woken up? All right, cool. So we're experimenting with this, and we're pretty excited about it. So Geofence is one of those things that I think, if you're an app like Foursquare, this is awesome. So you know what are the top 100 bars in the city, and you just install geofences for those 100 radiuses, and that's it. No more location updates. Your app will get woken up as I walk into that bar, and the app can say, hey, would you like to check in? But not everybody has that caliber of data. Not everybody is restricted to those use cases. So we're not sure if we're going to use this. But at the very least, there are some interesting things you could do combined with the activity API. You could say, if the user's home, so just create a geofence for home and work maybe. If the user's home, stop. So if they're having dinner or if they're walking around their home, I don't need any more updates. They're probably not doing anything interesting and social. They're just hanging with their family. That's it. They're not going out. They're not getting dinner. So you can do some interesting things. It's a really simple API. Again, it's based on pending intents because your app is expected to be sleeping or not awoken, not running. And you can get notified both enter and exit, which is nice. So, and it's a really simple API. Like these things that are for the type of things that they do, phenomenally straightforward. Like compared to like getting transitions in a grid view, this stuff is really straightforward to code for the most part. It's harder to test because you can't just sit in your desk and fling the UI and see if it's working. You have to go around and find a buddy with a car sometimes, but it is something that's pretty easy to code for the most part. Some of the other things that we're looking into, this is beyond what's actually available immediately. How many people here are familiar with Project Volta, the Android L? Google announced this at I/O. This is basically, you guys remember Project Butter and all these things, Project Svelte, and Project Volta is all about battery efficiency in Android. And if they do two things about it in Android L. One is giving developers tools, so prodding us along to measure and optimize and improve and watch and do the right things. And I haven't played with this whole lot. There was about a month ago that someone put in a really good pull request to actually fix some of the tooling. So I'm not sure where it is yet. But the promise is that you can dump your battery stats in raw mode from your device and then use a simple Python app to render this HTML page. And if you can see, it'll tell you all the times GPS wakes up. So if you've done any iOS programming, there's tools like this in Instruments, and this looks even better because this actually throws in your process within it, right? So you can tell who's causing it. And wake lock is basically when the CPU wakes up. You can see when the screen's hot, signal strength, all that stuff. So this looks super promising. The question remains how easy it'll be to get started, but the end result looks really powerful, and I'm hoping you can take advantage of that. Anyone use this yet? Yeah, I think it's the code is all up here. It's a Python archive. Looks pretty reasonable. Just a matter of playing with the L device. Future things that we're looking into that we're excited about, keeping an eye on. Hopefully it'll be there soon. BLE devices. There's vendors downstairs that are talking about some of their hardware. The cost of these are going down quite a bit. Beginning of the year, they're $30 for each of the pucks, the BLE pucks. Now they're a tenth of it if you buy it in bulk. And who knows, it'll be pennies soon, right? So that'll be great. If you can just litter a place like this with BLE beacons, you know exactly where you are, and no need to use cell towers, Wi-Fi, satellites, anything, right? And this could be outdoors too, right? So if you're in a park, and these things are good for a year or two, usually with the batteries that they have. So that's a great thing to have. One thing that we're kind of thinking about is just peer-to-peer Bluetooth sometimes to tell you where you are, especially if you're discoverable. This is kind of a far-fetched idea because there's a lot of privacy concerns and just Bluetooth's not that reliable across many phones, let alone your phone. Now we're talking about many phones, so we're probably not going to spend any time on this. One metadata that comes along with photos. So that's a nice, cheap way to get some location uploads. So like if you notice, Instagram doesn't really ask you for your location a lot of times. It just knows based on the EXIF information in the photos, which most cameras can't unless you explicitly turn it off. So that's a nice thing. Just make, as long as the user's aware that you're grabbing this, that's a nice thing to have. There's something called the job scheduler, so sort of like scheduling the alarm manager stuff. Job scheduler seems to be more for based on state changes of the device rather than the clock changes, right? So is the user on Wi-Fi? Is the user connected to a power outlet? Rather than has it been 20 minutes? But it does sound like job scheduler is much more optimized for repeating tasks versus alarm manager. And I think that's my last slide. So that's my contact information. Stick around here for questions as well. I would love to hear about any other tricks and tips that people have had dealing with location. I think I've been pretty happy with where our app is now and how many, get a full day of usage without having to worry about the background location updates. And the goal is to kind of continue that and be able to do interesting things around it. That's it. Thank you. Yes? Not yet. No, we haven't launched yet.
Are you going to publish
Yes, yeah, I'll definitely have the deck up.
I like that one where you're actually like switching between foreground and background. And actually implement something similar, but only in like a broadcast receiver and after like, service time down location client, which I think might be a bit.
Yeah. So I'm hoping to make a library out of that at some point. My first task is to figure out if pending intent. So let me go back a little bit here. If this is supposed to work,
It does.
it does work, but I'm not sure if the battery is.
Because you said it's balanced. I mean, I've actually had experience building a Geofence library company, and one of the improvements that I made after the first for 1.0 was essentially creating a background server that was, use locating. And part of it was using the pending intents instead of just doing the callback directly.
So this works technically. I'm just not sure if the battery impact was not as good as I expected. It didn't help me that much. If my goal is to not to show up in the list of worst apps.
Right. I mean,
So.
I can tell you, offhand, that when I did run this library on my app that I'm responsible for work, I think the battery impacts about 2%.
Oh, that's good.
Well, that's because it also doesn't do it with the network. Yeah,
I see.
It actually factors in things like network connectivity. So I'm just wondering whether or not, instead of just relying on, pending intents. Well, I guess in that case, for doing an activity or right, would it just make sense to keep doing alarm manager instead of the direct callback?
Yeah, it's something I have to research some more. It's a fair point.
So pending intents are large. We have to collection widgets on screen because they're large.
Yep.
So that may be the context.
Fair point. Fair point. It might not be the GPS hit as much as the other CPU issues that it brings up. Cool. Yep. Sorry. We do another callback. So we say create a new client, and it only takes sometimes it takes up to a minute, but we don't care. It's sort of so literally the experience from just staring at the screen was so if I go back to this guy here, so this icon disappears, comes back up after X minutes, appears for about 30 seconds, and then goes away again. And that's what we want, right? Which is only keep the GPS hot when we need it. So we don't do last known location because that's not guaranteed to be very accurate. So we actually say, here's my heuristics. Sorry. Here's my. We pass in the same things, and we get one update here, and then we just disconnect, and then we reconnect. And so that's been working out really well for us. Again, there's only been a couple of weeks of testing with a few dozen devices. We hope to continue testing more and maybe publish something about it. So. Great. Thank you very much. I'll stick around for a little bit.